Hey everyone, it's Nefis here. In this video, I'll attempt to explain the basic premise of this presentation, that is the looming and perhaps the almost guaranteed death of ESO PvP, which in itself is a nuanced and slightly complicated topic. Let me be clear, ESO is not at risk of dying, not even close. Unlike those who heralded the death of the entirety of ESO in 2014, 2015, 2016, and 2019, against the backdrop of various unfolding events or circumstances, I would say that this time around it's perhaps the most serious it's ever been, and the worst case scenarios would include the sphere of PvP and ESO completely falling into irrelevancy. It's not my intention to convince anyone what I'm about to present is the irrevocable truth or the objective truth at the moment, but more so it is my attempt to coherently present my thoughts on the perennial subject of the Elder Scrolls Online dying anytime sweeping changes are made to the game, or new competitors, whether it was Black Desert Online, Final Fantasy XIV, and now New World arrived to the scene. We'll first start with some history, as I don't expect all viewers to know how we got to this point where a PvEer is making, or perhaps to the surprise of many, bothering to make a video about the part of ESO which scarcely receives attention from the overwhelming majority of the population. You see, it never used to be this way. Many others and I had initially come to ESO after seeing the alluring trailers of Siege, open field PvP, and of course, the great cinematics emphasizing the Alliance War. Many ESO players today simply don't know that ESO was set up, or at least promoted, to be PvP-centric, yet it became extremely clear following the devastatingly failure of a launch ESO had in 2014, much of the focus had to shift in 2015 and 2016 onto PvE, in terms of content, post-Imperial City DLC, that could draw new players until we arrived at what we recognize today as a very, very aggressive content schedule. And this happened in 2017 with Morrowind, with which at E3, ZeniMax Online Studios representatives, including Matt Fearer, pledged to deliver 3 quarterly DLCs a year along with one big update, otherwise known as a chapter or expansion, such as Morrowind, Somerset, Ellsworth, Greymore, and Blackwood. Since this content cycle was introduced, PvP was put on the sidelines, not in terms of combat balancing, as many PvE players are quick to point out in their misguided anger against PvPers, but in terms of addressing long-standing issues that remain and will most likely remain up until this point in the video you may be watching today in 2022, or perhaps even years from when this video is posted. The largest among these issues is of course the decaying quality of the game's performance over the past 5 years when it came to handling both the amount of players and the amount of actions by said players in PvP. Contrary to the armchair developers that so often plague the Reddit or the forums, crying out that all a multi-million-dollar company has to do is replace their server hardware, which you'd think such a company would have done so long ago, it is quite clear that there's only one logical conclusion to be drawn. And that conclusion is the problem of lag in PvP is so complex that it is incredibly difficult to fix, or perhaps so difficult it is impossible to fix it within this Gordian knot of code known as the Elder Scrolls Online. I have seen the deer removed from Zerodead, the lighting patch blamed. I have seen players endure the months-long performance test that even saw the implementation of global AoE cooldowns in order to gather any scrap of data that could potentially help with the restoration of Zerodead. But year after year, month after month, week after week, test after test, patch after patch, any hope of seeing such a restoration dwindle, and continues to dwindle drastically alongside the number of players interested in PvP. Even I, who others call naively optimistic, am, admittedly, abandoning any notion of a functioning Zerodead. The problems ESO PvP has, however, is not restricted merely to the surface level of the game, but on a deeper level of community, or lack thereof, that has only gotten worse as a result of the stagnancy in PvP. The poor performance of the game for PvP in conjunction with the corner perspective of a minority called the PvPers that stuck around to no avail, and the lack of results from recent tests and so forth have resulted in mass disinterest and severe mistrust of the developers, to the point that some players would have once prided upon themselves on not playing certain playstyles or not exploiting are now the same players who shrug and say, if they don't care, I don't care. There are undoubtedly viewers who are watching and listening to this video that will be quick to judge and condemn these PvPers they perceive as this being a confirmation of PvPers unconditionally being toxic. Yet, if you are one of the viewers to do so, take the worst patch you may have experienced in PvE or elsewhere, whether it was in terms of passives not working, bugged achievements, instances being desynced, content not working for several patches, all of which has happened, but multiply all of this by continuous 5 years, half a decade, and you'll understand those who you're quick to criticize. Yet, viewer, you will ask, well, why haven't these PvPers left yet? For the same reason you don't leave, I suspect, but also because many of those who have stayed for so long also love the combat system in ESO. You will hear this all the time from many PvE and PvP players. They love the combat system. Despite the lag, the bugs, the questionable crown sword choices, players either absolutely hate the combat system or absolutely love the combat system. A common saying amongst many PvPers is that they enjoy the PvP in ESO, but only when it works. And therein lies yet another issue. While combat may yet be enjoyable, what use is the combat if it doesn't work or even gets touched in the slightest way, such as cast times? It is worrisome that PvP's only defender is the combat system, which struggles to keep up on the highly stressed servers or struggles to even get any action in dead PvP campaigns. What doesn't help matters at this point as well was the developers' attempts to incentivize PvP to those not interested in it in the form of the golden vendor, potions, item sets, and so forth. Ironically, this incentivized the act of PvPing in many instances. Whether it's Battlegrounds flags, Chaos Ball, where groups refuse to fight, or Cyrodiil sieges, where groups will go out of their way to go for empty keeps. Unfortunately, the PvP reward system and victory conditions of ESO PvP are procured most easily by not PvPing. Furthermore, the incentivizing of PvP along with the changes to PvE pushed PvPers into an isolated vacuum for them to become much more self-reliant. What I mean by self-reliancy is that their needs are actually mostly taken care of by alliance points. Their gear farming can be done in normal PvE content and not veteran. Their gold needs can be fulfilled by niche markets such as Talvar-based goods. And of course, outside of the occasional item set or now mythics, PvPers don't exactly need to buy DLCs or have ESO Plus, a stark contrast to most ESO PvEers who will always have ESO Plus. It is more often than not that you will find more PvPers not needing ESO Plus or not needing to get DLCs or even chapters at times. This not only feeds into PvPers being an undeniable minority that can be overlooked as customers or a not so profitable demographic to the devs, but it also presents the issue of PvP as being entirely seasonal, feeding into a vicious cycle of disinterest in PvP from both ZeniMax Online Studios as a business and from the rest of their player base. Adding to this, PvP has steadily become much more seasonal. Its bursts of activity, reportedly on PC and even on console at times, only supported by double AP events or other seasonal incentives, just isn't working out. To an outsider who may look at the social media of the other shows online, this may be confusing, as quite often, especially on places such as Twitter or Facebook, when seasonal events such as Mini Mayhem start up, so many people seem to care about faction loyalty or not. Blood for the Pact, for the Queen, for the Covenant. However, all this is a mere illusion, as most of this cheering is not based on the actual PvP itself, but on roleplay values or the equivalent of a seasonal cheering for a sports team without being too invested. Efforts by players both old and new to raise the popularity of specific PvP activities such as dueling, group versus groups, organized raids, have largely failed after their honeymoon phases once the performance became worse or arguably incredibly terrible balancing decisions and failures in regards to combat stifled any attempts to grow such interest. The lack of new content since 2017, more than 4 years ago now, when Battlegrounds was first introduced, compounded by the lack of results for performance fixes, has also finally led to numerous content creators and communities and finally conquering the fear of their sunken cost fallacy in terms of money, but not time, into leaving ESO or at the very least considering leaving PvP. Unlike the early years when ESO was supposedly threatened by BDO or other games, there is now enough of a time investment by the older player base and a sufficient wedge of an obvious lack of action or care for PvP perceived by newer players as an obstacle to a potential future for or in PvP. Due to all what I said and more, such as the recent failure of lowering the time to kill with the introduction of poorly balanced such as Dark Convergence and Hrothgar's Chill, it is no wonder that the biggest PvP content creators and streamers have also decided to mirror their communities in deciding to move away or entirely quit ESO altogether. While content creators leaving ESO, or any game really, is not unprecedented, it is the amount of content creators leaving that is particularly concerning for the potential growth of PvP, or at least a potential growth of interest in PvP on the community end of things. As ESO continues to barrel down this path of 3 DLCs and 1 chapter a year that bloat the game with much PvP content but no PvP content, the time is surely ripe, the circumstances just right, that many people who once loved the game will now seek out other games such as New World or really anything for them to invest their time into to fulfill their PvP cravings. It doesn't matter if it happens this month, a year from now, or several years from now, so long as the developers don't add anything new for ESO PvP, then yes, ESO PvP will assuredly die. There are at least 3 potential futures ESO PvP has at this point in time, in my opinion. The first future, PvP will increasingly become stagnant, irrelevant, and ultimately, if there's no systems to support a interested population, then there is no interested population. Why waste time and money on it? The devs may as well make ESO entirely PvE based, which would surely make the combat balancing devastatingly simpler and easier, as currently they need to juggle combat changes between PvP and PvE. Of course, this is a very extreme scenario, but the second scenario is that PvP will get content. Perhaps most of the disgruntled and disillusioned PvPers will never come back anyway at this point, but there would still be hope for new PvPers and newer content creators to fill in the gap. And of course, the third scenario, and perhaps the most improbable, is PvP as far as Zerodead and Battlegrounds matchmaking goes will miraculously get fixed. But again, this is a highly improbable future. Out of these 3 scenarios, I find the second one to be perhaps the most hopeful and perhaps the most realistic. Perhaps abandoning Zerodead at this point would be the best decision for the Elder Scrolls Online so devs can focus on other content for PvPers to actually enjoy and partake in. A similar mass exodus of players happened not so long ago for the endgame PvE community post-Morrowind in 2017, and back then, I surmised that it would take at least 2 years for the community to grow and gain a foothold again. Since then, the endgame PvE community has made a resounding comeback and has emerged stronger than ever. It is, I think, at this point, unavoidable to try to sidestep such a mass exodus from the ESO PvP sphere once New World and other games continue releasing this autumn and in the near future. But with this scenario, I would think it the best for a re-establishment of trust between the devs and their community, while providing an escape from the dauntingly unsolvable problem of Zerodead for more exciting content that could bring both new and old players into the fold for PvP. There's a lot of things I did not talk about in this video that I could have talked about. A lot of factors, a lot of people, a lot of history. This was just a very simple breakdown of a very large topic. However, I hope this video creates some sincere discussion for many players who did not understand how we got to this point, where a PvEer needs to give their thoughts on the matter of PvP within the context of the Elder Scrolls Online. Thanks for Netflix and chilling, stay safe, and see you guys next time.